Hello, everyone. I'm Dion Cook, and welcome to Modeling to Schematics, a full AV design workflow. It's presented by Tom White. This webinar is brought to you today by our sponsor, Vectorworks. Before I hand the presentation over to Tom, I just need to go over a very quick couple of housekeeping items. For everyone viewing today's webinar live, it qualifies for a half CTS, CTSD, and CTSI RU. Please allow up to 7 business days to view those on your transcripts. If you have any issues, please email my team at webinars@avixa.org. The webinar should last approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and all attendees have been placed on mute. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window, only that so today's moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, simply move your cursor to the bottom of the live stream video box, locate the Q&A icon, and type away. Just please be mindful that there is a separate menu for the chat, and don't ask your questions there. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars in about 7 business days. Tom, please take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Dion. Just share my camera for a moment and say hello to everybody. Thanks for joining us on this webinar this evening, my time. I think it's afternoon where you are. My name's Tom and I'm the industry specialist at Vectorworks based in the UK. And my previous experience has been about 15 years in the entertainment industry as a lighting designer, production electrician. I think you call them master electricians. And in the UK, master electrician is kind of responsible for literally anything in the theatre or venue or auditorium that has a plug on it, basically. So that's not my remit. Hasn't only been lighting devices, but also like playback systems, everything from video playback, projectors, camera systems. And for many years, I used a variety of programs. I've always used Vectorworks, but I used to combine it with programs like OmniGraffle, SketchUp, Excel, Lightright, to kind of like bodge, as we call in the UK, a workflow together to kind of create all of the details, drawings, and information that I need to create all of my entertainment items that I'm using for a particular schematic or project. And what I've learned over the last few years, having been involved with Vectorworks, is how I can kind of unify that workflow now just literally within the single software package. So I'm going to take you through what that workflow looks like now. So what we're looking at the moment is Vectorworks Spotlight 2021. I'm just going to switch workspaces. I'm going to be switching between the ConnectCAD workspace and the Spotlight workspace. You can, if you want to, create a hybrid of the two, and that's absolutely fine. Let's wait for this to load, won't be a second. So yes, I'm going to take you through kind of importing a DWG or survey 3D model, and placing some projection screen tools, speaker array tool we're going to be looking at as well. So I'll get going. I'll just head over to the first part of my process would be importing the survey file, which is usually a DWG. There's a whole variety of import options here. Just to save bandwidth, I'm just going to mute my camera. I'm still going to be here. Please feel free to put questions in the chat as they occur to you in case you forget them later on, and I'll endeavor to answer them all at the end. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to work with imported 2D geometry in Vectorworks. Yeah, I can filter selected geometry. These AutoCAD layers, when they come into Vectorworks, they get created as Vectorworks classes. I can make multiple selections of geometry very quickly and easily. There's also commands like I use all the time, such as select connected objects, and then shortcut Control-E extrude, and I can kind of enter heights for things. I'm not going to make you watch me do this for hours on end, so I'm going to show you one I've done already. In case you're wondering roughly how long it takes to create a 3D model from a 2D line drawing in this way, this particular model was about 3 hours to model. I'm showing you this model using a clip cube tool, which is another little really useful little nugget I wanted to share with you because it's kind of hidden away in a menu over here. I only found it fairly recently. Wish I'd known about it sooner. It's basically in the top right hand corner of your screen, you've got these triangles, which basically control what kind of shortcuts what kind of menus and tools exist on the top of your screen. So you can actually customize this quite a great deal. You can also customize pretty much everything that you can see on your screen at the moment. So you'll see here, I've got Show Clip Cube selected. I'm just going to turn it off for a moment so you can get an idea on how it works. The Clip Cube, without a prior selection, just wraps itself around the entire model. I can then select the Clip Cube, and then I can section through the model like this, just as a way of trying to navigate a tricky 3D model, maybe just to try to get inside something and work with some geometry. I can pick up the Clip Cube and move it like this, which is really useful. It's kind of interacting with the geometry. I can temporarily disable the snapping so I get it nice and smooth. In case you're wondering how to do that, that's just the key just to the left of the Z key. This makes it much easier to navigate through. The really great thing about this tool is that I can also use it to make viewports. So I can make a nice 2D image of this view, literally by right-clicking on this section viewport here, create section viewport, and send it to an existing sheet layer, which you might refer to as paper space. We call it sheet layers. It's essentially the same thing. There's many similarities within the program in terms of how things are organized. So this is my 3D model I've created. So the first thing I'm going to do with this process is I'm going to insert a projector using the projector tool. So I'll just switch to a top plan view for a moment. And I'll just go to the event design tool set in the bottom left-hand corner here. You'll notice that I'm looking at some of these tools and I can see the icons as well as the text. So you can actually toggle the appearance for this. So if you're new to the program and you can't find something, it's very easy to make it easy for first-time users. If I get really stuck, now I just hit the F key and I can literally search for absolutely anything. So like video screen, whatever, and it just comes up. So that's really nice. Okay, so I'm going to select the video screen tool over here. And before I place my screen, I'm just going to make sure I set all of the default options, preset them in the tool. So this is going to be a front projection screen. I'm basing this on the premise that the theatre in the UK have asked me to create a screen in order to kind of be able to run cinema performances over the top of theatrical productions, which is quite common in the UK, just as a way for that particular venue to get some extra revenue. So I'm just going to place a projection screen in the auditorium. I've chosen the aspect ratio, the screen size. Now, whenever you see these little drop downs in Vectorworks, you're not really restricted to this. So I've actually customized some of these in some way. I've customized the projector one down here. I've added some of my own content to this. These are basically just library files that exist within the program that you can add to. So it's totally possible to kind of create your own sort of bespoke custom list of favorite things, which is what I'd recommend that you did. There's a huge variety in terms of like how you can create the geometry for both the projector and the screen. You can offset, you can do lens shift, you can get pretty much any trim height for the screen or for the projector item itself. And you can show the cone, which is quite useful because you can see any problems with the theatre architecture. I'm going to show you this placed based on the lens, first of all. And this at the moment is obviously set the projector to line up with the center of the projection screen. But again, you can offset that position as well. You can display a variety of text around here as well. I often do things such as IDs, for example, or like mains power information, things like that. Or if I'm going to be using, I often do the drawings for a couple of different theatre shows that tour. And we actually have to swap out quite a lot of the lenses based on the distance from the balcony front to the proscenium. So this is quite useful information to add onto the projector itself. In terms of the 3D appearance of the screen, I can also add an image. I'll just leave this set to a default image for now. This is just the 16:9 color bars. There's quite a few different options in here. It's quite easy to create these images as well. And these kind of render really nicely and emit light in the rendering as well. We're not going to be looking at vision today, but this can also become an NDI surface if you wanted to run any content over it in a separate program called Vision, which is really, really useful. I just click OK. So in the first mode of this tool, it's going to place the projector based on the distance from the screen and the lens that's been chosen. So wherever I decide to put it, it's going to place it in the same place. What I can do is I can use this tool in the second mode, whereby I can place the projection screen, first of all, with a double click. And then with a third click, I can place the actual projector. Just give me 1 second, I'll run that again. Check I'm in the right mode. And whenever you're trying to draw things perfectly horizontal in Vectorworks as well, or vertical, hold down the Shift key. That's another useful thing to know about. Cool, so there we go. Place the projector. It's going to be bolted to the underside of the balcony, as you can see in this view. And again, these are all hybrid objects now. So this is its 2D appearance. Its 2D graphic has some really nice geometry. And it has these useful lines here, which I can use just to make sure that I'm not going to actually get any shadows from the plasterwork of the proscenium on my screen, which is great. There we go. And again, they're fully hybrid. So you'll see here that when we switch to a 3D view, it's a fully operational 3D model. And again, you can import your own content for this. That's entirely possible. There's a little camera up there, which you're going to be looking at in just a moment. Now I'm just going to navigate around so you can see the screen. I can just checking for any kind of collisions with any architecture, etc. There's a border around the screen. Again, that's kind of customizable as well. I'm using to navigate around the view in this 3D model. I'm using the 3D connection space mouse, which if ever you have to do lots of CAD stuff, particularly in 3D space, it just makes navigating the view really quick and easy. They also do a really nice compact version, which is really transportable. I often find myself working on a laptop a lot of the time, and it's hard to recreate a kind of a good setup without it. So I'm just going to go and insert some speakers for my video playback system. So some subs just in front of the stage in what would normally be the kind of orchestra pit area. And I'm going to put some ground stacked arrays up as well. Okay, so back into a top plan view. I tend to work in a top plan view for pretty much everything. And then again, I nip into a 3D view to check things, etc. There are sometimes that I don't do that, which is basically when I'm working with truss objects, I might work in a 3D view, but most of the time, this seems to be the most straightforward when I'm kind of laying out a project. Okay, so speaker tool, this has changed recently. It used to be in Vectorworks that you could use this tool to quite cleverly create any kind of speaker you wanted to create with any kind of dispersion values in here. And now we've actually been able to implement the resource manager. So now it's really easy for me. I can actually just open up here and I can search for any particular speaker manufacturer in these libraries that I want to use. I've already placed some of these speakers in the drawing, so they already exist up here in my open files. Just another useful bit of information is it's entirely possible to search these libraries. If you're actually clicking in the root folder up here where it says Vectorworks libraries, then any text that you enter into this here, you can then just pick up anything you want. So that's a big improvement. So as I said earlier, I've already got these in the drawing, so I can actually just locate them in my open files and dig them out. I'll do it 30D. There we go. Okay, cool. I'll just use one of these for now. I'll hit select. And then it's a little bit like the projection tool. It's just a case of double clicking or click once and rotate. And here's the subs that have been placed again, the hybrid objects. So they've got a 3D model and a 2D appearance. The show dispersion range is currently turned on. There's currently a listening height in here, slightly unusual because I've made my origin slightly different. And I've got a throw distance. The throw distance is going to control the preview that's going to get generated. So when I turn the class on that controls the dispersion, I can just get a rather simplistic but useful view based on that throw distance of where that's going to end up. Obviously with a sub, it's quite hard to really tell directionally. But again, we'll look at this again in a moment with the speaker array tool and see how it is useful. So if I now just place a ground stacked array on top of those subs, I'm going to use the speaker array tool this time. It works in a fairly similar way. Again, before we get going, I'll preset some options. I obviously could fill in a listening height, for example. Again, we've got the ability to show various text around the speakers as well. If I look at configure array, here I can choose a particular bumper to use. Now, I'll probably leave this set to generic, but there is, if you change these options to symbol, I often find that I can search for any kind of bumper that I'm going to use for a specific manufacturer's speaker or whatever. I can kind of pick from this list here, but I'll just change this back to catalog, because for many years, if I couldn't find the exact bumper, I would use this to actually create a bumper. I could also dictate the rigging points as well on here, so where the hoists are going to connect with the hanging frame for the speakers. If I have a look at speaker A and speaker B, you'll see here you can kind of configure what speakers you want in the array. This is ground stacked and it's going on top of some subs that already exist in the model. So I'm not gonna put a sub in here, but what you would normally do is have obviously two different options. And then in the final tab of this, we have the actual array builder itself, where it's entirely possible to do things such as splay angle, which is referred to as angle relative to preceding here, but in the UK, most of the time we call it splay angle. So you can pick specific speakers and you can enter a splay angle. Whoops. And it's going to show you a preview on the right-hand side of what that's going to look like. I can also swap existing speakers if I change my mind. I can also delete speakers that I don't want to use. Okay, so I've already placed one of these. So I'll just click cancel. And I'll double click and play this back. So I've placed my speaker array. Now, I would probably turn the dispersion on, have a look, and then maybe do some tweaking. And again, once you've created the speaker array in here, it's really easy for me to kind of come back in and just do reconfigure the array up here. And I'm just going to basically make any changes I need to make. And anything I change in here is going to automatically refresh on the model itself. And essentially, once I've done that, I'd probably just then check it in a right-hand side section view, which you've got here, which is just showing me the main focus point of each of these speaker units. Now, obviously, this is never going to give me the dispersion value or any kind of heat mapping based on the decibel level at a particular frequency. I'm never going to get that accuracy here. I'm always going to probably use something like array calc or similar to do that kind of workflow. But what this is quite simplistically going to enable me to do is, have I got enough boxes for this room? How many can they sell the gallery, as we call it in the UK? Can they sell the gallery? Can they sell the balcony? Is everyone going to get enough, basically? Okay, so that then kind of, after I've done my ground stacked speaker system, that kind of brings me to the camera tool. So again, I'll just head back again in the 3D view now. The camera tool is in the event design toolset just over here where it says video camera. And I often come in here and I can choose various different lenses. I can choose a particular body. And in this instance, because this is really just a sort of temporary solution to the video relay problem. So the kind of context of this is really that in the UK, they're very sort of, firm about the start time of performances in theatres and concert halls. And if you arrive after the start time, you don't get admitted into the auditorium until the first kind of logical break for you to go in. So in most UK theatres, there's usually some kind of relay system to the foyer to enable those latecomers to see what they're missing, basically. And so this is kind of mocked up a similar sort of system. So I just used literally just a clamp on the balcony rail to get the camera onto. Once you place the camera in here, it's then possible, you can make changes. I'm showing you how to preset these options each time, but actually, to be honest with you, sometimes I'll place an item which will be kind of just full of default options, and then I'll just fix it all in the object info pane. That's fine. So over here, you'll see things like activate the camera. So we can actually have a look at what the camera is looking at. We've also got the ability to have a look at this in a couple of different render modes as well. So fast render works, etc. Just the appearance and how it looks. So OpenGL, or for example, wireframe. Now I can also just focus the camera. So I can click aim camera and click on the center of the object I want to focus on. Or I can kind of pan it around, for example. I can zoom, etc. There's kind of a whole host of things you can do with this, including if you're really trying to get nice rendered images out, you can use the camera tool for this, which works really well. I often use it and I tweak some of the exposure settings just to kind of allow a bit more light into the shutter, which is nice. And playing around with the bloom and vignetting is really nice as well. So it's really easy to get some really nice looking images. Once the camera is active in this way, all I do next is I literally just go view, create a viewport. And because it's picked up that I'm using a camera to make this image, it's going to use the viewport. It's going to use the camera to make the viewport. Again, I'll just take you to the sheet layer that viewport got sent to. So here's kind of a simplistic render of what that's going to look like in the auditorium, as you can see. Now I would then export that image, and just for the sake of this 3D model, and my next save view takes me into the foyer, and we also have a television tool, an LED screen tool, where you can select a TV model to place. Again, this casing list is customizable. I often find myself prioritizing content in this list by removing content I no longer use, and also adding in custom content. So again, you can customize this to be your favorite displays or monitors. It's got the same as the other tools in terms of their stands, etc., and the kind of rigging options. And you'll see here, I can edit the screen image, and I can then select the image that I'm using and assign that to be the screen image. Okay, cool. So I can see what the camera is going to see in the foyer. Now, once I've drawn all of my elements within the 3D model, that kind of then brings me over to ConnectCAD. So as I mentioned before, I used to use a program called OmniGraffle for this, which I really enjoyed. Had a really nice user interface, but I often found myself, I'd have to be using Excel or like numbers or something just to keep track of all the data. In terms of for that time, it was mostly for DMX playback racks, etc. So it was things like IP addresses and universes and DMX addresses. So it was a real pain just to have making sure that everything was correct in both the spreadsheet and the drawing. ConnectCAD obviously works in a fairly similar way. It's a very sort of typical schematics program, but what ConnectCAD does is I can actually import my Excel spreadsheet of the patch into the program, and it will redraw the schematic for me. And I'll show you some of that workflow towards the end of this session. So again, it has kind of circuits and circuit tools and devices. I'll show you, obviously it has a workspace as well, which I've just shown you a moment ago. I'll show you how to create devices in ConnectCAD first of all. So in this case, then we've created all of our spotlight elements within the drawing. Now, the next part of my process is I would then create all of the schematic elements. Again, this is all in the same project folder, but it's just on a separate layer. So in terms of my organization, I've got the actual 3D model and the 3D fixed elements, and then I've got a separate layer from my schematics. So here is a device I've already placed. Again, I think I found this one in the library. You can also create devices really quickly and easily. So what I would do is select the device builder tool. And then here you can see I can choose a whole variety of different types of devices. And I can also look at various makes and models. And that's obviously just showing LED displays as an option. But I also use this builder as a way of creating devices, because I often find that when you're drawing schematics, that the content that you need, if you're working on a relatively new project, a lot of the content you need, some of it hasn't had its schematic item created yet. Now, we have a content team that's constantly adding content to these libraries all the time, but you often come across a piece of content, or for me, it was mostly when I was touring shows in China, in Beijing and Shanghai, and actually a lot of the equipment we were using, there was no schematic item because it was either a copy of something or it was just brand new, and it wasn't available in sort of the Western market. So I found myself using, being able to do this is actually incredibly useful. So I can basically say, I can give it any kind of name, or I just write some nonsense for now, and I can tell it what I want it to be called on the actual schematic as well. Now here I can just say, well, I want it to have 4 IOs that are kind of LAN, and they are RJ45 connectors. You can choose different types, obviously, and then you can say, well, which side of the box do you want to create these sockets on, left and right? So it's basically just a really kind of eloquent way to create a device. Now, the device might be a physical device, so it would have an actual physical height, width, and depth. This is not referring to the size of the schematic item, but it's actually going to, because ConnectCAD is going to create these as physical items as well. or enable us to link them to physical items in the drawing, which I'll show you later on. So you'll need to enter that information. Also the number of rack you use as well. Now, I often find I do often create some playback systems for video and audio for some small scale to medium scale theatre shows, and things like the QLab virtual patch. So within QLab, there is a patch before it gets to the sound card. So if I can denote some items as being virtual and only sort of not necessarily in the equipment items, but they will feature in the schematic. So there's kind of workarounds for most common industry issues that you kind of come across. It's kind of really eloquent, well thought through solutions. So if I just click, I would normally click OK at this point, it would create this device. Now, if you create a device and you think, oh, actually, I've forgotten to add a socket, you can literally just click the socket tool on here and just add one. It's really simple. And again, I often don't like the appearance of these, so I can double click and I'll come in here. And I mean, I sometimes add bitmaps to these. It's just a question. I mean, a lot of the shows that I work on now have a single stage management team, maybe one touring technician that goes with the show. So I try and make this as simple as possible. And so sometimes I put bitmaps and thumbnail images of the equipment in here, which sort of makes their life a lot easier when things go wrong and help the venue crew to troubleshoot things. You can also move sockets around. You can also just ensure that you've selected everything to be the correct signal type, etc. Exit this for a moment. So I've created my devices. This may seem a little bit slow. I mean, I actually always work from a template file with a good stock of devices already in the resource manager. So providing you're doing that, you can then use the new device tool instead, where you can just choose a device, select it from the resource manager in here. So there's like a couple of UPSs, and then I can just literally click and place like that. They'll also incrementally number themselves as well, which is nice. Cool, so I'll just turn on the rest of my devices on this particular schematic. Now I'm going to make some connections with the circuit tool. I'll just turn on some of the other ones first. I'm going to make a connection that is deliberately false or like implausible. If I just go to the connection tool and select HDMI out up here, I'm going to try and plug that into a USB input, just so we can ask ConnectCAD later on to check some of this for us and see if it gets it right. Okay, cool. So again, the other thing just to mention is I always make sure everything has a separate name and an ID, because it's going to create a spreadsheet of all of these items and what gets plugged in where. And so everything needs to have a unique name. Not only that, but everything needs to be numbered as well. When it comes to numbering things, you kind of got two choices really. I've actually added the Spotlight numbering command from the Spotlight workspace into here. So I can literally select some circuits and say Spotlight numbering, let's number these with the prefix XQ or whatever, start at 1 and number them from the top to bottom. Click OK. That's the kind of way I like to work, but I understand if you've got thousands of circuits on a document, you're probably not going to want to do that. So in the ConnectCAD settings menu, you can actually choose one of the existing algorithms, or you can create your own algorithm if you want to. And the way these work is they take, for example, the source device name and the port number, for example, and then they increment and apply lettering based on the outcome of these algorithms that get played back. And then lastly, there is a catch-all that if none of that other stuff is present in the previous rules, then it will automatically have a catch-all at the end. Here's a default cable number for this cable. Okay, click cancel. So I'd make sure I number the devices and I make sure I number the cables. The other thing we've got here, so looking at this schematic in a bit more detail, I've got my front of house camera. The audio output is plugging into a DI. And then both of those things are plugging into what we call in the UK a facility panel or a patch panel, which is basically like a flat steel plate, which is located on the front of the balcony. And that flat steel plate, as you can see, has some XLR connectors and it has some BNC connectors. And then it comes out in the foyer in an actual rack over here. In terms of the appearance of all this stuff and the text and everything, I know I've got a couple of text that's on top of each other. I can kind of sort that out. All of this is customizable. Choose your own fonts, all your own labels, literally everything. Don't have to put up with the stock stuff. Cool, so I've got my facility panels down there. I've numbered my cables. Before I create the equipment items and we start looking at how to create these racks, I'm just going to right click into the space and just do check drawing. And I'm going to ask ConnectCAD to basically just check everything is correct on here. So let's do that again, click OK. And it's just going to make sure everything's okay. But as you can see, it's picked up our deliberate mistake over here. It's gone, you can't plug a HDMI cable into a USB. It's just not going to work. So it's highlighted that as a problem. So I'm going to delete that. Okay. And then the next part of this process for me is just a case of then going to ConnectCAD and selecting update rack elevation. And what the update rack elevation command does is it basically takes all of these equipment items that are physical, so it leaves the virtual ones alone. And based on the sizes that are in the device builder, it creates those panels in 2D for us to slot into racks. Any rack mounted equipment, any equipment that isn't rack mountable also gets created as well for us to edit and move around and put somewhere else. So we can have a look at what that looks like. Here's one of the typical panels. This is what it does. It normally dumps it all in a line. I've been playing with this already, and I've already got a 2D rack out, which I'll show you in a moment. But first of all, let's have a look at rooms. So again, after it's spitted all of these items out onto this layer, I then just say, well, I can draw some rooms. So if I just now go to the second tool set and select a layout room, and this could be anything. So I could draw a room at the top like this and call it substage, for example. This is just a boundary which interacts with these equipment items. So now if I were to move this equipment item substage, you'll see here that it picks up down here. It's currently in the room substage. I can move it back onto the balcony front, and it now understands that it's back on the balcony. So it's just a case of you being able to break down where the equipment is kept. And bear in mind that ConnectCAD knows what the wattage of most of this stuff is, and it also understands what the weight is. So I can also get it to say, well, I've got a rack in a room somewhere, and it's got loads of UPSs in, it's really heavy. So what's the weight in that room? So you can kind of create all kinds of reports, worksheets to break that down for you. Cool, so the panel items then, obviously this is our facility panel on the front of the balcony, but as you can see, it doesn't really look like a facility panel at the moment. So if I just, in the object info palette, just ask it to fetch the connectors from the schematic. And so it just searches for all the connectors that are in use, and it generates all the connectors on the panel. Now it just does it in a way that it thinks is correct, which is obviously just along the x-axis from left to right. But then I can just double click, come in here, and I can just physically start to move some of this stuff around and just say, actually, can we put those over there? I'll make a bit of a hash of this because I don't want you to watch while I do this for hours on end. So I'll try and keep this relatively quick for you. But so I can obviously move these around. The other thing I can do is I can now make a viewport of this, and I could send it to a CNC machine to mill the steel panel out as well. So you can kind of design the panels as well if you want to, if you're also responsible for creating those. Cool. So let's go and have a look at some of these equipment items then. So here we have the equipment items that have been created by ConnectCAD on here. And again, I've got another panel here, so I'll just do another get connection. Let's get connected. That's a generic one. Bear with me a second. Okay. Now this 2D rack. So basically there is a 2D rack tool, which again, you'll recognize the span on the pencil. Again, I can give it a name, a height in rack use, width, etc. And the configuration, obviously that's in the UK, it's mostly 19, and it's not going to fill the room ID out until you place it. And then you literally just place the rack wherever you want. So as you can see, I've already got one in here. I can pick up my CTP panel, connection panel. I'm just going to put that in here, in this rack queue there. And I can just pick up items and move them as I see fit. I've got an equipment drawer in here, which I'll just move. Just put that at the top for a moment. So customizing the appearance of these items, again, you could put bitmaps in here. If I double click this, I can kind of just draw shapes, etc. You know, I kind of do anything I want in here, to be totally honest. You know, add geometry. And the other interesting thing about this is that if I was going to make a 3D rack out of this, which I'll show you in just a moment, I can also get it to use a symbol. So if in the resource manager, if there is a symbol for this equipment drawer, which I haven't got in this drawing, but just to show you the workflow, I could actually say, let's choose a symbol in here and actually create itself as a 3D symbol, which I could flatten as well. So for now though, if I just arrange some of the other equipment items in the rack, there we go. I'm just going to move Blackmagic now. Because I'm from sort of a theatre and opera background, and some of our touring racks, we mainly used to do this with sort of KVMs, to be honest, and kind of charges for things. We would literally have items just loosely Velcro taped floating around the rack, which is less than ideal, but I understand it's something that people still want to do. So without necessarily assigning it to a rack view, you can have stuff floating around inside your rack if you want to. It will just stay within the boundary of that shape. Now, let's try and do everything properly this time. So I'm going to put these items into this rack, but as you can see, they are non-standard rack items, so that they're not going to fill this nicely. So I'm just going to choose a rack frame from the menu and insert the rack frame. Now, the rack frame is a way of inserting non-standard equipment items or equipment items that are modular. So, for example, various video matrices that have slots for cards and things, etc. So it's a way of kind of solving that issue. So if I just change this to take the PSUs out, and then in here where it says I can also tell it how many U's I want it to take up. So power supplies, I've made that 0 now. Height in rack units, let's make it 2. And let's make the horizontal slots 2 and the vertical slots 2. So you'll see here that I've now created like a little grid on here. So now I can just pick up my video interfaces and just drop them in there. There we go. So that's how you kind of work around with the non-standard equipment. So now the idea being now is that once I've done this, I could then create a 3D model of this rack, which I'll show you in a moment. Before I do that, I'll just mention that quite often I need to offset the equipment items in the rack so that I can line the rear of each equipment item up. This just makes cabling inside the rack a little bit neater. So I can also just tinker with the mounting depth in here. I can play with as well. So in terms of that relationship I talked about earlier between the 3D speaker array, video screen, camera that we were talking about earlier that we placed in the 3D model, how do I correlate that to all of this stuff? So if I were to just go back to the schematic for a moment and select my front of house camera, what you can see here is I can actually select edit equipment. Now, because this camera isn't on the equipment layouts, I just showed you all the nice 2D rack stuff. This camera exists within the 3D model. So when I select edit equipment, it takes me to the 3D model and it shows me the physical camera in the space. So it understands that those items are related. How have I been able to do this? Well, first of all, let me just turn the theater on just to get a bit of context in the background. I've basically made this a symbol. So once I've created this and I've kind of I've focused the camera, it exists, it's all fine. Using the modify create symbol command basically means that then I could get ConnectCAD to create an equipment item, check use symbol, and then choose balcony camera in the symbol. So it now understands its position, it's linked, etc. Okay, so after that kind of slight segue, I'm just going to go back to the 2D rack tool and here, and then we're going to look at placing a 3D rack. So the 3D rack tool itself is literally just a 3D rack just here, which again, I can just place inside the drawing, and it just places it as like an empty rack that's not pulling any information from anywhere. But what you'll see now is that I can actually link this to the foyer AV rack, and it's going to change itself based on the settings I've got. So rather than showing the rough version I've just done, I'll take you to the 3D rack view inside the foyer. And here we can see our 3D rack that's basically been populated in this space. Okay, now this would enable me to then looking at, I could then, after I've done this process, I could then look at some of the preview features we've got in Spotlight. We've got a full kind of cable tool suite where I could also work out conduit runs, trunking runs, all of that kind of information. So like in terms of linking the balcony panel with this panel here. So it'd be possible to do that, but we're just looking at inside the rack at the moment. Let me just have a look at some of the reports that we can create. Okay, so the next part of this process is then really for me to hand this over to somebody and probably a worksheet so they can go on site and install this equipment. So if I just were to go to ConnectCAD documentation, you can make cable labels with this as well. And equipment items that are within the rack, you can calculate the cable lengths for. If I just go to current layer cable report, and once this is opened, I'm just going to convert this to a list, which then makes it editable. Now, I've kind of got two choices. I can do this within Vectorworks, and I can take this on site and do this work. And I can, if I come over here, if I click File over here, I can export this natively straight to Excel, and it opens in Excel, and save that and give that off. And then, you know, if someone were to edit this, so for example, let's just say, for example, that my friend John was installing this equipment, and I can see here that, see what he's plugged in where. So we've got Blackmagic Converter active. Let's just say, for example, that he edits his spreadsheets and he changes the active to be the spare. So he plugs in the spare back, because maybe there's something wrong with the one that was originally supposed to be the active one. So he's going to need to order a new one. And then at some point he'll go back in and switch them over. So that's kind of a relatively, you know, it's a relatively believable thing to happen. So he comes back in, we import the worksheet over here, and I can say to ConnectCAD, well, before you do anything, let's at least have a look at the differences between the two. So can you compare the current cable list on the drawing? And so it tells me that in here, the active one is not plugged in, and the converter, the spare, sorry, has been plugged in. And so I can see the differences as well. Here it says here, this is what's changed. So it automatically picks up those differences. And so I can now quite safely just hit backspace to delete those. And then I can say, well, because now I understand that, you know, things have changed and are slightly different, let's now ask ConnectCAD to redraw this schematic for us. So we can do update, make the connections from the list. And it's going to basically add all of those connections in and basically redraw itself based on the worksheet. I'll just double check I haven't broken this. Just leave this open on here. Compare, just undo that a couple of seconds. I'll bring back the old ones and then do a redraw command. Okay. So there's a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll just start answering because I'm getting towards the end. I'll just do this redraw command in just a minute. But this question popped up, mentioned that I'm using Spotlight. Why did I choose Spotlight? And were I using any of the optional add-on modules? Visio files. I don't know if you can import Visio files. That's a good question. I'll have a look at the import list. The import list in ConnectCAD is smaller than Spotlight, so at some point I could switch workspaces and have a look at that. In terms of my background with the software, most of these Vectorworks and most of my career, kind of since 2001, when it was the main software that I learned at college. And it was back then, it was just a case of just drawing very simple light plots. So let me just have a look at this for a minute. Update, make connections from list. But I mean, I did really enjoy using OmniGraffle. I loved the user interface. It was great. It was really just kind of the key thing for me was about, you know, having that relationship. There we go. That's fine. Having that relationship between the worksheet that you can see here and the schematics. So really about kind of saving me as much time as possible, but also not just like kind of saving time. It's just a case of making sure that everything is up to date. You know, it's really hard to keep track of everything because most of the time when I was drawing schematics, I was actually also drawing the light plots. And some shows, I received quite a lot of shows that toured to the UK from Australia, and actually I was kind of drawing the scenery, the lighting, the truss, and the schematics. So I was actually kind of, Vectorworks really seemed the logical program for all of those, all of those solutions. That was the thing, you know, it's kind of, I didn't need, you know, I think I would have probably had to own quite a lot of software to kind of be able to do that and fulfill all those requirements. And just the kind of sheer collaborative nature of the software, means that you can draw such a variety of geometry in it and bits and bobs. So just having a look at some of these other questions now, I think we can safely say that we can open the floor out to any questions that anyone has. Let's get rid of the worksheet. I've just left just to say that if you are looking at this, then have a look at the forum. For me, is the best place of finding how to use ConnectCAD and all the kind of like tricks and hints. And Randolph's asked about someone strong in 2D AutoCAD but inexperienced with 3D. How many weeks of use would you suppose it would take to begin to reach this level of familiarity? And I can say that in the UK, I'm currently one of the UK training team as part of my role here. And we do a conversion course from AutoCAD to Vectorworks, which is kind of just sort of the 2D fundamentals, as you say. And that course is 2 days, but we find that people from the AV and entertainment industries usually accomplish that course within a day. So it's kind of 2 days for people who are also new for drawing on computers as well. And then to do the extras, so the 3D modeling course we do as a day's training as well. And then ConnectCAD itself would be a day's training. And then Spotlight would be a separate day. So a day for each package after the program. The way it works is for the program itself, it's very similar in each of the packages. So you're not really kind of like starting from scratch each time. Once you understand the fundamentals of Vectorworks, then plugins packages like Spotlight, for example, and ConnectCAD are relatively quick to master. And the main thing really for me, why I like about it, is the fact that you can spend a long time in a top plan view in the auditorium like this, and you can have no idea that actually before you know it, you have, oh, I've drawn a 3D model. It's brilliant. I mean, I know I drew those as extrudes, but there's some other things I want to show you where you can basically select a line in Vectorworks. So let's say, for example, you've imported a bunch of 2D geometry. Like it's just literally just lines. And then I can say, well, actually, I want those lines to be walls. Change workspaces for just a moment. I could do all kinds of things, like the function I'm going to show you is called create object from shapes, but you can also do things like select all of the squares in a drawing. They're supposed to be D&B E series speakers, but somebody's just drawn those rectangles. So in Vectorworks there's a command where you can do convert, replace with symbol, and they just swap them all for speakers. So here we have in the Spotlight workspace, create objects from shapes. And in this case, I can say, well, let's make this as a wall, for example. I'll just leave it set to the standard settings for now and do kind of create objects from shapes. Again, and there's things in here like floors, ceilings, irrigation, like soft goods, lighting pipes, etc. So, have a look at that in a 3D view now. You'll see, oh yeah, I've just created a whole bunch of stuff in there that I have no idea. So that's another reason why I like it, is because you can be working in 3D kind of unwittingly. The other just main bit of advice I'd like to give now is if you're working in 3D, and I still find I used to use SketchUp a lot, and I know a lot of people still like, I'm not sure how to do this in Vectorworks, so I'll just draw this in SketchUp and I'll import it. And it's kind of the real key is just to make sure that you are in automatic plane mode, because if you're in automatic plane mode, then you can literally, I just change this for a minute, automatic. I can now detect the plane on which I want to draw automatically with the cursor. You can see it goes blue. I can draw a line from there to there. And then I can just say, I want to get rid of that. And so it's kind of very similar to a kind of SketchUp workflow. I can just say, I could draw another line from somewhere to somewhere and, cut another bit out, or I could say, I want to pull that bit out like that, for example. So it is relatively easy, but again, it took me a while. Just the last little kind of bit that fell into place was just making sure I was in automatic plane up here. And the shape itself has history now. So if you accidentally run out of undos or you make a mistake, you can double click these shapes and you can edit the history of them. So you can go back in time to a certain part of the shape just by literally keeping on clicking, and you can say, oh yeah, I want to go back to that bit or that bit, for example. So it's really easy if you make a mistake just to kind of go back to the original shape. I'll quit that for now. And I can even copy and paste a copy of the 2D shape that I used to create it all originally and start from scratch. And so it is relatively friendly, as long as you kind of, just there's a couple of things that can catch you out, a handful of things. And as long as you've made sure of that, it's fine, really. Okay, so just have another look at the questions to see if something else has come in. I think we're good at the moment. Please feel free to pop any questions you have in the chat as well. I know that you can try this out as well if there is a demo version. And in terms of learning it, the other thing I think I should probably mention to you as well is that there is a on Chrome. I'm just going to open my Chrome browser. Won't be a minute. I'm going to show you Vectorworks University, which is our own kind of e-learning area space. They've got loads of training videos on here, courses that you can enroll on, and then we've just started accreditation as well. So actually, in terms of like your career, you can be accredited now in this software. So yeah, you can literally just choose a subject or search for individual courses. They'll tell you how long each of these courses takes. There's literally loads of courses on here that's worth a look. So you can quite happily, just in your own time, work through the software yourself. There is also ConnectCAD content on here as well, but anything you decide on a whim, I really want to know how to do that. Would be really useful. I mean, the help's pretty good as well, to be fair. But yeah, most of the time I find myself hitting F. And if you know what the command is in AutoCAD or whatever, then you'll probably find it. Okay. Just wondering if we have any other questions at all. No, I think we're okay. Cool. Brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me onto your AVIXA webinar this evening. I hope it was useful and interesting and helpful to see this workflow. As I said, check out the Vectorworks University. That's well worth a look as well. And at the moment, Vectorworks got loads of its own webinars and content that can be viewed. We're also running our essentials courses at the moment as well, which can be attended. It's well worth a look. And yeah, just like to say thanks very much for inviting me, and best of luck, everybody.
Thank you, Tom. And I'd like to thank everyone so much for joining us on today's webinar, Modeling to Schematics, a full AV design workflow. This recording will be available on our website at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 to 7 business days, and your half of a renewal unit will be applied to those transcripts within those 7 business days. If you have any trouble with this, please contact my team directly at webinars@avixa.org. Just a side note for CTS holders, if you've registered for the webinar with an email address that we don't have on file for you, you actually won't get credit for attending it live. We can correct it on the back end, however. Just email your account rep and let them know that you used the wrong email address when you registered, and we'll get it corrected for you on the back end. So I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Vectorworks, and a huge thank you to Tom for helping us to understand modeling schematics and the full AV design workflow. Please stay safe, everyone, and make it a great day and evening.